It happened the night my daughter was born. I was still in a haze of morphine and stitches, my arms trembling as I cradled my newborn for the very first time. Her name was Ava, and I had whispered it to her through tears and awe. The pain of the emergency C-section still echoed in my body, but none of that mattered. Not while I had her. Until someone knocked on the hospital door. A woman in a pressed blazer walked in with a clipboard and a guarded smile. She introduced herself as a representative from Child and Family Services. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, when she said, "Your parents have filed for emergency custody. They claim you're mentally unwell and pose a danger to your child." My breath stopped. The world blurred. I looked down at Ava's face, still red and wrinkled, utterly innocent, and I heard my mother's voice from 3 weeks ago ringing in my mind. "You don't deserve her." I remembered the way she had smiled when she said it, not with love or even sadness, but triumph. At that moment I understood this wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't a moment of concern or misjudgment. It was war, premeditated and calculated. And I knew what I had to do. I held Ava closer and said nothing. But something inside me shifted. I was no longer the quiet daughter, the compliant one. I was a mother now. And they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. My name is Dana Whitaker. I am 31 years old and teach American history at a public high school just outside Charleston, South Carolina. I have always been the quiet type. The kind who remembers birthdays, writes thank you notes in cursive, and avoids confrontation even when my bones are screaming. I have auburn hair that I keep in a bun most days, glasses perched permanently on my nose, and a tendency to speak gently, even when I am angry. My students say I have librarian energy, which I suppose is fair. I grade papers with care, organize my sock drawer by color, and prefer rainy days to beach ones. I've spent most of my life trying not to take up too much space. That's how I survived my family. My father, Alan Whitaker, is a retired pastor from a small Baptist church. He is a man who speaks in scripture and silence. My mother, Loretta, is a social worker whose reputation for being generous and community-minded hides the truth of her home life. Then there's my younger sister Claire, bright and beautiful and spoiled since birth. She was the apple of their eye, and I was something else. When Claire got caught shoplifting at 15, they said she was experimenting. When I got a B in chemistry, they said I was lazy and disobedient. When I cried, they said I was dramatic. When I went silent, they said I was cold. And when I tried to explain what Grandpa Paul had done to me as a child, they said I was lying. I learned to bury it all, to smile through it, to be the kind of daughter they could drag to church and display like an ornament. But the moment I became pregnant, something in me started to unravel. I began to imagine something different for my daughter. A world where she wasn't punished for existing or told her voice was too loud or her memories too inconvenient. I didn't want her to live in the same silence I had. And that made me dangerous to them. Because silence was the only thing that had ever protected their version of the truth. I had kept it for 30 years. But I wasn't going to anymore. It started subtly, as these things always do. At 6 months pregnant, I was still teaching part-time, waddling through the hallways with a swollen belly and a sense of growing unease. Ben, my husband, was supportive in theory but distracted in practice. He worked in finance and had recently started a new job that demanded long hours and frequent travel. I was mostly alone in preparing for the baby, which I didn't mind. It gave me space to think, to breathe. That peace was short-lived. My colleagues threw me a baby shower one Friday afternoon in the school library. They decorated the room with pastel banners and balloons, stacked cupcakes in the shape of a crib, and given me a book titled Ava's First Year. My heart swelled. I had chosen the name Ava months ago, long before the gender reveal, long before the ultrasound even confirmed she was a girl. It was the only name that had ever felt right. But then my mother showed up, uninvited and overly dressed, wearing a pale pink dress that screamed for attention. She gave a sweet speech about motherhood and legacy, then raised her glass and said, "To baby Paulina, may she carry on your grandfather's strength." The room went quiet. I felt a cold knot twist in my chest. "Her name is Ava," I said calmly but clearly. "It's not Paulina. It never will be." My mother's smile faltered. "We'll talk later," she replied, still grinning for the crowd. But there was no later. There was war. Over the next 3 weeks, I was flooded with messages from distant aunts, cousins, and family friends. Each message said the same thing in different tones. Why are you being so ungrateful? Your mother has done so much for you. Grandpa Paul was a great man. Honor your elders. Don't break your family's heart. I tried to ignore it at first, but it became impossible when people started showing up at my work. Aunt June waited outside my classroom one day and asked to pray for my confusion. My cousin Tommy left a voicemail saying I was bringing a curse on my child by breaking bloodlines. Even my father dropped by one night when Ben was working late. He stood in our entryway, arms folded, voice low. You're making this harder than it needs to be. All you have to do is name the baby after Paul. That's all your mother wants. That's all she ever wants, I replied. What about what I want? He looked at me as if I were a stranger. You don't know what you're doing, Dana. You're not well. The words echoed in my mind for days. You're not well. Not, you're wrong. Not, you're being difficult. But, you're not well. It felt planted, calculated. Still, I kept moving forward. I went to work. I avoided calls. I finished the nursery and packed my hospital bag. I ignored the churning fear growing in my gut. Until the day of my 37th week checkup. I walked into the clinic and froze. Sitting in the waiting area were my parents and Paul. Grandpa Paul, the man who used to lock me in the cellar when I cried. The man who left me in the dark so long I lost track of time. The man who told me not to scream too loud because it hurts the Lord's ears. That man was now 90 and shriveled and grinning with rotten teeth as he reached for my belly. We wanted him to hear his great-granddaughter's heartbeat. My mother said sweetly. I stepped back. I couldn't breathe. Her name is Ava, I said, my voice louder than I'd intended. And she will never be named after him. Not ever. The waiting room fell silent. My mother stared at me. Then she leaned in and whispered just loud enough for the receptionist to hear. Then you're no longer our daughter. I left the appointment early, heart pounding. That evening, my phone stopped working. I called the provider. You've been removed from your family plan. The representative said casually. I checked my email. Locked out of the shared emergency savings account. Every number I tried to call went to voicemail. The family group chat I'd been a part of since smartphones were invented now said, you have been removed. I was officially exiled. 3 days later, I stood at the counter at Bye Bye Baby, trying to purchase a car seat when my debit card declined. I checked the balance. 0. The joint emergency account my parents helped me open back in college was drained and closed. I didn't even know they had access to it anymore. I drove to the parking lot and screamed into my steering wheel. I had never felt more alone. Out of sheer desperation, I called the only person I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Ben's grandmother, Margaret. She picked up on the second ring. I could barely form words. But 45 minutes later, she pulled into the lot. No questions asked. She didn't ask for details. She just opened her car door and let me in. Then she drove me to her house and wrapped me in the kind of hug I didn't know I needed. That night, as I rocked back and forth on her guest bed with swollen ankles and a swollen heart, she brought me tea and told me that no one, had the right to take what was mine. She stayed quiet while I talked. When I told her everything, her calm demeanor cracked. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a stack of voicemail recordings. Your mother has been calling me too, she said, her voice tight. She hit play. My mother's voice filled the room. Calm, measured. Dana's having episodes again, she said. Paranoia, delusions, refusing medication. If anything happens to the baby, we'll need to act fast. Another voicemail instructed Margaret to contact a family therapist if Dana showed signs of erratic behavior. They're laying groundwork, I whispered. They're trying to get Ava. Margaret nodded. Then we get ahead of them. And just like that, I realized the truth. This wasn't about a name. This was about control, about silencing me, about continuing a pattern that had already ruined too many lives. But they had made a mistake. They had forgotten who I was. They thought I was the quiet one. But I had been documenting everything. I had never thought of myself as the kind of person who planned revenge. But that night, sitting in Margaret's den surrounded by tea-stained cups and folded quilts, I opened my phone and began pulling up everything I had quietly saved for years. I didn't even realize how much I had until it started appearing folder after folder. There were voice memos from therapy sessions my counselor had encouraged me to record. Messages from my mother berating me for speaking up in Bible study. Screenshots of texts from my father calling me manipulative and cold. And even short videos I had captured under the table at Thanksgiving where my relatives laughed while mocking me and called my anxiety an attention-seeking phase. Margaret sat beside me and took notes in her nurse's scrawl, labeling dates and names, nodding occasionally as I pieced together the full timeline of their abuse. When I showed her a clip from 2 years ago where my mother drunkenly bragged about cutting off a cousin who had refused to let Uncle Paul bless her newborn, Margaret's hands tightened around her pen. "That's not just abuse," she said. "That's a pattern." I barely slept that night. My hands moved on their own, assembling the pieces into something cohesive. By dawn, I had created a 47-minute video compilation. No music, no editing tricks, just raw truth, time-stamped and labeled. I added subtitles so no one could claim they misunderstood. And at 6:00 a.m., I uploaded it to Facebook. I tagged every relative, every childhood friend who had ever told me to be more grateful, every churchgoer who praised my mother as a saint. Then I turned off my phone. Labor started the next morning. I thought the timing was stress, or a coincidence. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe Ava knew it was time. The contractions were steady by the time Margaret loaded me into her Subaru and drove toward the hospital. The road blurred through the windshield, but I remember the sound of her voice counting my breaths, her hand gripping mine at red lights. I was admitted quickly, 3 minutes apart, then 2, then I couldn't track time anymore. The pain swallowed everything. 14 hours later, Ava arrived. Screaming, warm, alive. They placed her on my chest, and in that second, everything else fell away. The bruises of the past, the silence of my childhood, the betrayal, the cruelty, it all vanished in her cry. She was real, she was mine, she was the only thing that mattered. That peace lasted only a day. The nurse came in mid-afternoon with a worried look. "We've had some people calling," she said gently, "claiming to be your emergency contacts. They're not on your file, so we've ignored them. But they're persistent." I already knew. My parents. The calls had begun. Margaret stood, her voice immediately sharp. "They're escalating." A knock came. A woman in a navy blazer stepped in, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as a CPS investigator named Hannah. "We received multiple reports suggesting concerns about your mental health and the child's safety. I'll need to do an initial evaluation." My body turned to ice. Hannah laid out the reports. Claims of delusion, erratic behavior, refusal of prenatal care, alleged threats made toward family members. "These are serious accusations," she said. "Are you currently under psychiatric treatment?" "No," I said clearly. "Only therapy for trauma. No medication. No diagnosis beyond anxiety." "Do you have proof that these claims are false?" she asked. Margaret stood taller. "She does. And so do I." Margaret handed over a thumb drive containing the full documentation, recordings, messages, the video compilation, even notes from my therapist verifying that I was of sound mind and had never shown signs of instability. Hannah reviewed the contents slowly. Her expression changed as she moved from file to file. When she looked up, she simply said, "I've never seen anything quite like this." Then the door burst open. My parents entered, uninvited, followed by a man in an expensive suit. "We're here for our granddaughter," my mother announced. "Dana isn't mentally stable. We have proof." "You need to leave," Margaret said coldly. Their lawyer stepped forward with a file. "We're seeking emergency custody. Based on medical history and witness statements, we believe the child is at risk." He handed over papers, falsified medical records stating I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 16, that I had refused treatment, that I had violent episodes. The doctor listed was someone I remembered vaguely from church. He had been a pediatrician, not a psychiatrist. "These records are fake," Margaret said, examining the dates. "This hospital didn't have a psych ward in 2007. And this doctor died in 2008. Before I could respond, Claire walked in. My sister. She looked nervous, her mascara slightly smudged. I felt a flicker of hope, foolishly. But then she spoke. I've seen her behavior firsthand, Claire said, voice trembling. She's unstable. She yells at voices. She thinks we're all out to get her. I'm scared for the baby. I stared at her. We haven't spoken in months. Claire avoided my gaze. Last time we had lunch. We never had lunch last month, I interrupted. You cancelled. Again. Margaret reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Let's try this, she said. She hit play. Claire's voice echoed through the room. Mom and Dad said they'll pay off my credit cards if I testify. I know it's wrong, but I need the money. Just say she's unstable. The room froze. Claire's face went pale. My parents' lawyer looked down, face stiff. Hannah stared at the phone. Did you record this? She asked. I record everything now, Margaret replied. My father stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Give me my granddaughter. I pulled Ava closer. Don't touch her. He reached toward me. Margaret yelled for security. 2 guards rushed in and held him back as he shouted, "You're unfit. We'll prove it in court." Hannah turned to the guards. Escort them out. As the door slammed behind them, the room fell quiet. I was shaking. Ava whimpered in my arms. Hannah looked at me, then at Margaret. You're safe for now, but I'm filing a full report. Forging medical records, coercing witnesses, submitting false claims to CPS. These are criminal offenses. I nodded, still holding Ava close. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply said, they thought they could rewrite my story. But I kept the receipts. Margaret rested her hand on my shoulder. Then it's time we burn the script. In the 72 hours that followed, everything moved at once, as if my life had shifted into a legal whirlwind. Hannah filed a formal report that not only dismissed the claims my parents had made but also opened an investigation into their conduct. Margaret contacted a family attorney she trusted, and within hours, emergency restraining orders were drafted against my parents, Claire, and Grandpa Paul. The hospital added security flags to my room, allowing no visitors without my written permission. My mother attempted to call the hospital 5 more times, each time insisting she had rights as a grandmother. Every call was logged, every voicemail saved. The most damning piece came when my parents filed official court papers including the falsified documents. Linda, the attorney Margaret hired, noticed immediately that the dates of my supposed diagnoses didn't line up with school records. One document claimed I was hospitalized for a psychiatric episode while my attendance sheet showed I was in homeroom that entire week. The hospital they listed had never offered adolescent mental health services, and the signature of the supposed doctor had been copied from a blank prescription pad. When we presented these findings to the court, it triggered an entirely new level of legal scrutiny. The judge ordered a forensic document analyst to review the files. Within days, we had a full report confirming the documents were forgeries. My parents' lawyer, realizing the extent of the lies, filed a motion to withdraw from the case. Word spread fast through our town. No other local attorney would take them on after that. At the hearing for the permanent restraining order, the courtroom was packed with relatives, neighbors, even members of my father's old congregation. I sat in the front with Ava sleeping against my chest, Margaret and Linda on either side of me. When called to testify, I told the court what had been done to me in the past, what was attempted in the present, and what it meant to finally stand in the light after years in the shadows. Margaret submitted the recordings, the texts, the video compilation. Claire, cornered by the audio of her betrayal, tearfully confessed. My father said nothing. My mother wept, not from guilt, but from losing control. The judge took less than an hour to issue the final decision. Permanent restraining orders were granted against all 3 individuals. My parents were barred from contacting me or Ava in any form. They were fined, required to pay my legal fees, and referred for criminal prosecution. 6 months later, they were sentenced to 2 years probation and mandatory counseling. They were also barred from filing any reports about me or Ava with any government agency. That chapter ended not with an explosion, but with a signature. A quiet pen stroke that finally closed a decades-long wound. I moved to Asheville with Ava soon after, renting a cottage on the edge of a wooded trail where the silence no longer felt oppressive but healing. I resumed teaching after maternity leave, easing back into lectures about the Revolutionary War while nursing a quiet revolution of my own. Margaret visited every week. She taught Ava how to hum lullabies and made us peach cobbler from scratch. I never spoke to Ben again after the divorce finalized. He had faded away during the chaos, never rising to defend me, never once stepping between me and the fire. His absence said everything. Ava thrived. She giggled early, walked early, and had eyes like mine, dark and clear, filled with something strong. When she cried, I held her. When she asked questions, I answered. When she smiled, I knew I had broken the cycle. One afternoon, while grading papers in the backyard, one of my students emailed me an essay draft asking about the concept of legacy. She wrote, "Can a legacy be broken? Or is it something we always carry?" I stared at that question for a long time. Then I looked at Ava, playing with sticks under the oak tree, her curls bouncing in the sunlight. I opened a new message and typed, "A legacy is only heavy if you keep holding it. You're allowed to put it down." I hit send. Sometimes people ask if I'll ever forgive my parents. If I'll ever reconcile. I don't know. Forgiveness, I've learned, is a door only I can choose to open. But I've locked the house behind me, and I'm not giving anyone else a key. The final thing I packed before leaving Charleston was a fireproof safe. Inside are 3 USB drives, a backup hard drive, and printed documents labeled with court seals. I don't open that safe anymore. But I'll never get rid of it. It is the archive of the war one survived. A reminder, not of vengeance, not of fear, but of truth. And in the quiet hours, when Ava is asleep, and I am grading essays or sipping tea by the window, I sometimes say aloud, just to feel it in my mouth, I did not imagine it. I did not exaggerate. I did not deserve it. I told the truth, and I walked away. For anyone who has ever wondered what the final straw is, for those raised in silence and punished for breaking it, know this. The moment you choose to protect your peace instead of their narrative, that is your beginning, not your end.